Uh, Secretary Austin, I'd like to go back to the topic of my first round of questions, the evacuation of Americans and our Afghan allies, the translators, interpreters, guards, security officers who sided with us, put their lives on the line, and who now literally have targets on their backs along with their families. I asked you who at the Department of Defense is in charge of our efforts to evacuate them, and with all due respect, you didn't give me the name of the person at DOD leading these efforts, but you pointed me instead to the Department of State and interagency efforts. I've been involved in working on this evacuation issue and on the refugee question for some time, along with this coalition of veterans, NGOs, concerned citizens, and some government officials. And the frustration I've encountered is that I've been directed repeatedly and constantly from one agency to another. DOD sent me to state, who would then send me to the National Security Council, who would send me back to the Department of Defense. It was a Kafkaesque exercise in bureaucracy and red tape with no clear lines of authority while lives were on the line. And this private network or coalition was doing the work that the United States government would have done if it had maintained a presence there, but it had none. And that's why at Mazur and Kabul, it was doing that work. So I'm concerned that despite this committee's efforts to call attention to the looming crisis in the evacuation, we were unprepared. And as I mentioned earlier, a number of members of this committee went to the White House in the spring, asked for a plan, a strategy, and none was forthcoming. I'm concerned we'll repeat that mistake as we work to avoid a humanitarian crisis during refugee resettlement. And that will be a huge undertaking with hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees who are literally escaping torture and murder, coming to this country, many of them with nothing more than the clothes they had when they left. We currently have tens of thousands of those individuals on your bases, Department of Defense bases, both overseas at Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Germany, and domestically, as you well know, Virginia, Wisconsin, New Mexico, and Texas. This is a Department of Defense responsibility. It's a moral imperative. These people risk their lives for us, as you know on this panel better than any of us. And it'll be shared with the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, numerous other federal agencies. And we owe it, we own it. It's our responsibility. I'm a United States Senator, and I continue to have difficulty ascertaining who's in charge. I think we need an evacuation czar, a point person on refugee resettlement, whose mission is public and who is known to the American people to be in charge here. So I would like to ask you, how do we ensure that there is a official in charge, a point person, someone to ensure that Afghan children receive schooling, that there are language services, that they receive medical care? And can you give us an update on what the status is?
Well, again, Senator, thanks for your sustained interest and for all that you have done to continue to help get people out. And there is a process, there is a mechanism. State has responsibility, as you know, for being the lead to continue to evacuate American citizens and SIV applicants out of Afghanistan. That process is being run by Ambassador Bass. It's an interagency effort, and we contribute to that with a dedicated general officer as a part of that. In terms of the evacuees or the guests that are being housed in our installations, Department of Defense has responsibility for housing them and for their care and feeding. In terms of integrating them into our society, DHS and state really are leading that process. And I agree with you. It's very important that we do this the right way, and it's very important that we do this carefully, but as rapidly as possible, because we do have children that need education and all those kinds of things. In the meantime, DOD will remain sighted on making sure that they receive the very best care, and we provide for their safety as well.
Thank you.
Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General McKenzie, at the beginning of this hearing, Chairman Reed made a comment about the goal and mission that we're going to be looking at now in the future is to assure that Afghanistan never again can be used as a base for terrorists. And as we look at that goal, as we look at that mission, I think we need to be honest with the American people on how that will be accomplished. I don't think the American people should be misled about capabilities that are needed to make sure that we can conduct over-the-horizon counterterrorism operations. President Biden has pointed out that we conduct over-the-horizon CT operations to go after terrorists in other places in the world, including ISIS in Syria, Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Al-Shabaab in Somalia. General McKenzie, in those three locations, we have either a U.S. presence or reliable partners on the ground. Is that correct?
Senator, that's correct.
And in those three locations, do we have strike assets or basing agreements in nearby countries?
At the level of this briefing, yes, we do.
Okay. General McKenzie, when the department developed its initial plans for an over-the-horizon approach to counterterrorism in Afghanistan, did those plans assume that the Afghan security forces would serve as our partner on the ground?
So we developed plans that were neutral on that. We developed a spectrum of options ranging from we would have robust help from some future government in Afghanistan to a situation, which is what we have now, where we would have no help from the government of Afghanistan. So we developed options across that entire span of future possibilities.
But as we developed the options, you developed the options, and the reality is now that we didn't see this collapse coming so quickly, and we don't have partners on the ground. Is that correct?
We always had one of the options for CT in Afghanistan would be that we would be at a state where there would be no diplomatic presence there and there would be no help from the government of Afghanistan. So from the beginning, we always saw that as one of the possible futures.
And that's the situation we're in right now?
That is correct.
You stated that during the evacuation, we developed a pragmatic relationship with the Taliban, but you're not saying we should consider the Taliban to be a reliable partner by any means, are you?
I do not trust the Taliban. I do not consider the Taliban to be a reliable partner. And any time you deal with the Taliban, you have to look at what they do and not what they say.
General McKenzie, Yemen, Syria, and Somalia all border an ocean or a sea, and we can use carriers or other sea-based assets to conduct CT operations. Afghanistan, however, is a landlocked country, so we cannot use our sea-based assets in the same way. Our nearest strike base, or our nearest base, in Qatar is about 1,600 miles away from northern Afghanistan, so our strike assets are significantly further from potential targets than they are in other operating locations. Is it fair to say that it is more difficult to hit targets that are further away from where the strike asset is based?
Senator, in general, that's a factor. But I would tell you, because of our ability to refuel aircraft, to position, for example, during the withdrawal, we positioned a carrier off the Makran coast of Pakistan, which shortened the range considerably. So there are ways to get to that finished solution. But Senator, if I could just add, it is not the finished part of the problem that is the most difficult part of the problem. It is the finding and fixing the target that where we've run into great difficulties, particularly associated with Afghanistan, because of, as you noted, its landlocked location, its great range from our bases. And while we do have platforms that can fly in there, it eats up a lot of time and a lot of platforms to conduct that mission. That's why I said from the beginning, hard to do, very hard to do. It's not impossible to do, but there are, and we can talk more about it in the closed session.
Right, and it's hard because of lack of partners on the ground.
That is a significant factor that you look at when you look at any CT operation of this nature.
To even reach Afghanistan, our strike assets, they have to fly over other countries. So without an agreement from Central Asian nations north of Afghanistan, is it accurate that we're reliant on the continued use of Pakistani airspace for our over-the-horizon strategy?
Senator, you are correct.
And that is not a sure thing for the future, correct?
Senator, I wouldn't predict the future. I know they were very supportive during the last phase of our engagement in Afghanistan. I think we're now talking to them at various levels about how we might maintain the ability to do that in the future, but I wouldn't want to get out ahead of the department, the secretary, and the policy people on this.
But they also have a strong relationship with the Taliban. Would you consider that that's going to grow?
I would consider that they're going to be very conflicted about this, as they have been for the last 20 years.
Okay.
Thank you
sir.
very much, Senator Fisher. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the witnesses, I guess I'll direct this to Secretary Austin. What is the administration's current best estimate of the number of Americans that are in Afghanistan?
Senator, according to state, there are currently fewer than 100 American citizens who want to depart and are ready to leave. We got out 21 American citizens today, along with their family members, and we'll continue to work this, as you've heard us say earlier. The numbers fluctuate daily, and because more people come to light as time goes by, and they see opportunities to safely leave. And so this has been a dynamic process, but again, we will stay focused on this.
I understand that. I'm aware that you've had success in getting Americans out because I've advocated on behalf of some of them, and I've seen the results of your effort, and I know you will continue that. If I remember correctly, there started to be communiques to Americans in Afghanistan that they might possibly consider returning to the United States as early as March. Is that correct?
I don't have knowledge of those communiques.
I think that may be from a foreign relations, State Department standpoint. Obviously, you can't bring folks home who don't want to come home, but the number that you're currently looking at, and I understand that it changes, who want to come home is now less than 100, and I trust that you'll continue to be diligent about that. To the question that I posed in my first round of questions, and General McKenzie, I'd like to start with you. All three of you are leaders, but you also have on-the-ground experience, and I know you have a deep connection to Afghanistan and people that you fought together with and your partners and colleagues there, as well as the Americans who sacrificed so bravely. And for the purposes of the committee, we really want to dig into this question about why did the security force and government fail so quickly, because it bears upon future train and assist efforts or future humanitarian efforts. Beginning with you, General McKenzie, what are your own thoughts about the speed of the collapse of both the military and civilian government?
So, Senator, I believe that the collapse of the military and the government are completely linked. You can't consider one without looking at the other. And I believe probably the primary accelerant to, I'll take the military side first, the primary accelerant to lowering morale and general efficiency of the Afghan military was what they saw coming in the heels of the Doha Agreement, what they believe was forced upon them. And so I think that had a negative effect. Plus, as we get closer to the date that we're leaving, the clear vision that the United States is going to leave, and we're going to apply a system of, at best, partial remedies from their perspective to continue the maintenance of not only the main force, the conventional force on the ground, but also the really high priority items like their Air Force. And as I've noted before, we had an over-the-horizon solution to do that. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was our best attempt to do that. So I think that affected the military. But I would tell you what I think the DNA of those Afghan soldiers is the same DNA the Taliban had, and the Taliban fought pretty hard. And so I think it comes down to will to combat and fighting spirit. And I think that's where you get the link to the government of Afghanistan. And when your president leaves suddenly in the middle of a campaign for the capital, I think that finishes any chance at all you might have had of making a stand there. And that wasn't, and there were signals before then of disaffection and fractures in the Afghan government. Probably better people than me to talk about that. But I think all those came together and had a very powerful negative synergy towards the end. And this is not new. We've been able to see it for years. But, Senator, the one point I would make is this is not inherently a military problem. Mm-hmm. There are larger factors here than just the U.S. military and what we did or didn't do training the Afghans. So I'll pause there.
To your last point, of the 2 points you made, you could have the best fighting force in the world, but if they don't have confidence in their military or political leadership, it's hard for them to put it all on the line for a leadership if they lack confidence in the leadership. To Secretary Austin and General Milley, any additional thoughts?
The 3 choices that you laid out for us was your questions were, was it because of insufficient training? Was it because the troops were demoralized, or was it because we wanted things for them more than they wanted it for themselves? I would agree with General McKenzie that the Doha Agreement had a significant impact on the morale of the troops, but I would say that's compounded by weak leadership, corruption in the government, and the fact that the Taliban made a concerted effort to really reach out to provincial leaders and convince them that the Taliban was going to be in charge, and so they might as well side up with them early on. So.
My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Cotton, please.
General Milley, in the final 2 pages of your written statement, you lay out in some detail the circumstances of your phone calls with your Chinese counterparts on October 30th, 2020 and January 8th, 2021. You also say you'd be happy to make available various documents. I want to ask for 3 sets of documents, if we can get them. I think the first 2 should be fairly straightforward. One, could we get the list of people who joined you on those calls by name and by title?
Yes.
U.S. officials.
Yes.
2, could we get a list of similar calls you have made to your military counterparts around the world from, say, September 1, 2020 to January 20th, 2021?
Sure. Yes.
Again, I think there should not be an issue. There should not have any classified information. Third, you mentioned in that written statement that you, shortly after those 2 phone calls with General Lee, circulated readouts within the Pentagon and inside the interagency partners you have. Could we get those readouts as well?
Yes.
Secretary Austin, can I get your commitment that you'll work with General Milley and his team to get that to us both as quickly as possible and without unnecessary classification?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, on May 8th, you conducted at the Pentagon what's known as a rehearsal of concept drill, also called a rock drill. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's pretty important, especially for such a significant decision as withdrawing from Afghanistan. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it's been reported that you attended, General Milley attended, Jake Sullivan attended, Bill Burns attended. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Tony Blinken attend?
His deputy attended, Senator.
His number 2 deputy, Wendy Sherman?
No.
Brian McKeon.
Yeah, McKeon.
His number 3 deputy, Brian McKeon. Do you know where Tony Blinken was on Saturday, May 8th?
I don't.
Do you know if he used any DOD resources to travel between May 7th and May 10th?
I can certainly find out, but that's not something I was saying.
Yeah, I understand it's not right at your fingertips, but I think we should probably get it pretty quickly. I'd like to know if Secretary Blinken used any DOD assets, whether aircraft or air bases or personnel, air crews or ground crews, to travel between May 7th, 2021 and May 10th, 2021. Thank you for that. Secretary Austin, who chose September 11th as the date by which we would withdraw from Afghanistan?
I'm not sure that, well, certainly that was not a military recommendation, but the military, when asked to provide an estimate of how long it would take to retrograde our people and equipment. That number fell in the range of possibly up to 120 days, but certainly much shorter than that if we were uncontested. And as it turned out, we were uncontested. That date takes you to the end of August.
I'm sorry, Secretary, my time is limited. So can you tell me who it was that directed you, the Secretary of Defense, that September 11th was the date by which you would complete the withdrawal?
Nobody directed us that September 11th was a date that we would complete. I think that was an objective that was laid out by the administration.
I believe the President announced that in mid-April when he announced the decision. Someone had to come up with that date. You can't recall who it was that recommended September 11th?
No, that was not a military recommendation.
General Milley, is there any military significance to withdrawing by September 11th?
I don't know who come up with it,
Okay.
but sure the significance of September 11th.
General McKenzie, it's been reported by NBC News that you told Taliban leader Bardar on August 15th that if they took Kabul, we would bomb them. They obviously took Kabul on August 15th. We didn't bomb them. Is the report that you told him that correct?
That report is incorrect.
It's incorrect. Thank you. General McKenzie, why did we not conduct ground patrols into Kabul? The French did, the British did, the Germans did. We stepped outside the gate some. We flew Chinooks out to police up our people. Why did we not conduct ground patrols?
Senator, actually, I don't believe any of those nations conducted ground patrols into Kabul from HKIA. I believe that the British went out to what they call the Baron Hotel, which is a facility located about 150 meters off the HKIA compound, and they did business there. But no one conducted ground patrols off from HKIA going out. In fact, I'm very confident of that based on, I looked into it with my commander on the ground, so I'm quite confident when I make that assertion.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, one final question. Obviously, this is an issue on which many of our troops and our veterans feel very passionately on both sides of the issue. One of those service members, Marine Colonel Stuart Scheller, posted a very critical video on social media last month, and he was relieved of his command for that posting. Media reports today indicate that he is being held in pretrial confinement. Why is that?
I don't have any specifics of what caused him to be held in pretrial confinement, and I would certainly ask the Marines to provide that insight. So.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator King, please. Do you need a moment?
Discussion that we've had thus far today is a peculiar one about decisions. And the assumption seems to be that you could make a different decision, for example, on August 31st, and everything would have been okay and we would have gotten more people out. My understanding, General Milley, is that it was your view that making that decision to go beyond August 31st, and I'm using this as an example, would have had consequences which you and your colleagues judged would be far more damaging and dangerous to American lives than the decision to leave on August 31st, including being back at war with the Taliban, subject to terrorist attacks, and subject to perhaps airplanes being shot down by the Taliban. Can you, am I right about this, where the risk calculus was?
That's correct, Senator. We said risk to mission, risk to force, and risks to remaining American citizens in Afghanistan was going to go to extremely high, beginning 1 September if we stayed past 31st with U.S. military forces. And
you use that term risk to mission, risk to force as a kind of, that's a descriptive phrase, but we're talking about potentially hundreds of American lives, are we not?
Well, when we talk risk to force, we're specifically talking casualties, killed and wounded. And our estimate, my estimate at the time, this is 25 August we're talking about, is if we go to war with the Taliban on the 1st of September, there were 6,000 Taliban and 56 checkpoints in Kabul at that time. We would have had to clear Kabul. We would have had to re-seize Bagram in the road, this 30 miles of road in between Bagram and Kabul. That would have taken a significant amount of force. We're looking at probably a core operation. We probably, my guess is that we would have had significant amounts of killed and wounded. Exact numbers are always imprecise when you're doing those kinds of estimates, but it would have been significant. U.S. military killed and wounded, and the remaining American citizens would have been at greater risk.
You mentioned we'd have to have retaken Kabul. They had 6,000 troops. As I remember discussions in this committee when we were talking about retaking Mosul, the generally accepted rule of thumb is that it takes 10 troops to dislodge one in a city. That dislodging troops in a city is very difficult and takes a large number of attacking troops. Is that correct?
It is, but the disposition and composition of the Taliban in Kabul at that time was not the same as ISIS in Mosul. Mosul was a prepared defense. They were dug in, they were ready to go, underground positions, et cetera. The Taliban had just moved in, so it would have been not that level of fight that you saw in Mosul, but it still would have been significant. 6,000 is 6,000. And you're in an urban area of about 5 million people. So it would have been a significant level of effort, and it would have resulted in significant U.S. casualties.
Thank you. Do you know, and I want to be clear on this, there was a deadline in the Doha Agreement of March 10th for the beginning of negotiations. Did the administration, the former administration, make any objections or raise problems with the Taliban because of their failure to meet that deadline, or indeed to ever meet that deadline in terms of negotiations with the Afghan government?
I don't have personal knowledge of that. Zal Khalilzad might be a good one, our former Secretary of State, but I don't personally know.
General McKenzie, I don't want to go over the same ground, but do you agree with General Milley that had we gone beyond August 31st, that decision wasn't just, oh, we're going to abandon Americans. It was, if we stay until September 1st, we would have to make an additional troop commitment and our troops would be at risk. Is that correct?
Senator, that's exactly correct. And actually in the meeting in the tank with the JCS, I was the principal briefer who advanced that argument, and that does reflect my position.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In listening to your testimony today, and I've appreciated the amount of effort that you put into being very clear with us, it seems to me that we have left a power void in Central Asia that has already increased the threat of terrorism and has provided significant opportunities to our adversaries. Secretary Austin, a little while ago you indicated that, and I believe your term was, that if we would have had to have made an earlier withdrawal, perhaps in April or May, that it would have been very, very difficult to have had that completed in an orderly manner. And I think that's the way that you described it. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct, sir.
I think also, sir, you would probably agree that the withdrawal on the August 30th, August 31 deadline was probably not done in an orderly manner either, was it?
There are two issues here, Senator, if I may. First of all, you'll recall that we stated that General Miller planned for an orderly evacuation of people and retrograde of equipment. That plan was laid out, it was rehearsed, and it was executed so that by early July, all of the equipment that we wanted to retrograde had been retrograded, and most of the people were out, except for a small element that was in around the embassy and on HKIA.
Mr. Secretary, the American people watched with horror on TV during the last days in August, in which our young men and women in uniform not only died, but they were in the middle of huge throngs of individuals desperately trying to get out. I don't believe that you would suggest that that was being completed in an orderly manner.
No, so that's the second. The second operation was a non-combatant evacuation, which was, I think you heard me say early on, Senator, was we had some challenging times early on. We recovered from that and were able to.
But you would, Mr. Secretary, you would not consider that to have been done in an orderly manner, would you?
I would say overall we endured challenges, but again we were able to get out an enormous amount of people.
I don't disagree that the young men and women who wear the uniform of this country on that particular very challenging time period did everything they could, but clearly it was not in an orderly manner. They were in a very disastrous, and I think we would all agree, a very deadly situation. Would you agree, sir?
And you heard me say so, Senator, that, it was a very dangerous situation that we're in. And despite that, they were able to fight through the challenges. And because of their heroic efforts, we were able to do what we did. So.
Mr. Secretary, the reason why I asked this is because I think not only American citizens saw this, but I think our allies saw it as well. And I think what they saw was, first of all, that because of the date certain rather than a conditions-based withdrawal, because of a decision that was made by our president, because of that, we left American citizens behind. And we did leave Afghans behind who had served directly with our U.S. forces. And it appears that many of them believe that we did not appropriately consult with them about our activities in a timely fashion. And finally, to look at and to see American equipment being left there, even if it's not quite ready for use, but most certainly there in the hands of the Taliban, did not help our position with our allies, sir. Let me just move on very quickly. General Milley, I've got just less than a minute left on this, and I just wanted to comment. I think your second statement in which you shared with the American people and with us today, an expression of how in a very unclassified way, how the nuclear chain of command works. Part of this, and some of us have had the opportunity to observe in a tabletop exercise how that actually works with the processes working their way through with the president on down and the questions that are asked and the responses required and so forth. The 2022 NDAA has some very specific exercise requirements that the White House and other members are required to follow through. Do you know if either President Trump or President Biden had the opportunity to do a tabletop exercise and actually listen to the questions that were going to be asked of them should there ever be the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons?
I do not know if either one, President Trump or President Biden, has gone through that tabletop exercise.
Thank you. Once again, thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country.
Thank you, Senator Round. Senator Rono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, my colleague, Senator Duckworth, mentioned the idea of an independent commission to evaluate what happened before, during, and after the war in Afghanistan. So, Secretary Austin, are you open to such an effort?
Senator, I will always, as you would expect, always cooperate with my oversight committee.
Yes, because I, for one, very much agree that this is a 20-year war, and there are 4 presidents involved, and I'd like to ensure that there are some lessons learned from a 20-year forever war. And at the same time, I feel as though the Republicans have made a total about-face, a U-turn regarding the war. I thought that they wanted the war to end, and they were very supportive of President Trump when he made the deal with the Taliban to get out. So there's that, and clearly there are lessons to be learned in terms of the evacuation, but I think the decision to get us out of this forever war was a good one. Secretary Austin, the president, I want to move to a slightly different topic. The president has touted the Afghanistan pullout as necessary to free up time and money to deal with near-peer competitors like Russia and China, but that stated rationale is somewhat, I think, at odds with the administration's budget, which fails to align funding priorities with the lines of effort identified in the Indo-PACOM Pacific Deterrence Initiative. Secretary Austin, I had brought this up before when we had a posture hearing, so you don't have to get into it now, but I would very much appreciate the efforts and where we are in terms of meeting the 5 lines of effort under the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. Could you provide us with that? We
can, and I would just add, Senator, that I've spent a fair amount of time with our combatant commander since we last talked. He's laid out his plans and his intent, and I'm fully behind the effort that he wants to undertake, and so we look forward to discussing that with you.
Thank you. And along those same lines, nuclear disarmament talks with North Korea remain stalled, and I'm concerned that steps taken by the DoD, including zeroing out funding for the Homeland Defense Radar Hawaii, HDRH, and objecting just last week to congressional action to reauthorize funds to keep that program on track, put Hawaii at risk in the near future. And what is DoD's credible alternative to HDRH Hawaii going forward? This is the second time that Congress has had to put back money for that radar. So what is the alternative that the DoD has that will protect Hawaii?
Well, the capability that we currently have, Hawaii is protected, and again, this is an issue that we continue to look at, and you can rest assured that Hawaii will not be unprotected.
Well, I know that we're protected as of today. I'm looking at the future. So a lot of us have concerns about what is going to happen to the Afghani women and girls with the Taliban coming back. I'd be interested, Secretary Austin, to hear your perspective about concrete steps the U.S. can take to influence a future for Afghan women and girls that honors their human rights and freedoms.
Well, I certainly share your concern, Senator, and Taliban's track record on this is absolutely horrible. We'll have to continue we'll have to work to use economic levers and also international pressure to hold the Taliban accountable for some of the things that they said they're going to do. And again, I think it'll have to be an international effort to maintain pressure on the Taliban.
And at some point, I think we'd like to know, specifically what kind of international efforts are bearing fruit with regard to what the Taliban is doing with the women and girls of their country. Regarding our relationship with Pakistan, so I think I'll submit that for the record because I know we're trying to keep to a 5-minute. But the relationship with Pakistan going forward with regard to the Taliban. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Hirono. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Milley, in the previous round, we established that the withdrawal achieved no security conditions other than an unconditional withdrawal. We had to withdraw by a time certain, a date certain. Has the military, and these are yes or no questions, please, General Milley, has the military's task to defeat terror threats from Afghanistan gotten harder?
Yes.
Does the Taliban and its other terror partners have more ability to train and prepare in Afghanistan now that we've left?
More ability, yes.
Has President Biden or his policy staff provided any updated guidance or direction for countering terror from Afghanistan?
Yes.
Are we at a greater or lesser risk of terror attack from Afghanistan as a result of our withdrawal?
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell.
Yeah, I think we've got about, to elaborate a little bit, probably got about 6 months here to really sort this out, to see which direction things are going to go. It's not much time, but that's my personal estimate. It could be out to 12. And then we're going to have some indicators and warnings of what direction this is going to go. But that's where I'd put it.
In the previous round, and this is a comment, but in the previous round, each of you had admitted that your best recommendation was to leave a residual force in Afghanistan. Clearly, the president disregarded that opinion, that recommendation, that advice. And I do believe that this has left us less safe. A number of my colleagues have mentioned over the horizon. General McKenzie, you referenced the fact that we don't know yet how effective that will be. We don't have partners on the ground. Talked about the airspace that would have to be used for over-the-horizon capabilities. There is still a terrorist threat in Afghanistan. Now, on August 20th, President Biden had stated, what interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone? First, I didn't recognize that al-Qaeda was gone. General McKenzie, is al-Qaeda gone?
Senator, al-Qaeda is still, maintains a presence in Afghanistan.
And Secretary Blinken had said on August 22nd that the threat of terrorism metastasized out of Afghanistan a long time ago. General McKenzie, is there any terrorist threat in Afghanistan now?
We see is ISIS newly rejuvenated with the prisoners that came out of Parawan and Polycharky prison. They're gathering their strength. We have yet to see how that's going to manifest itself, but we know for a certainty that they do aspire to attack us in our homeland. And we know the same for al-Qaeda. So that threat, it has metastasized, and it is resident in other parts of the world. In my part of the world, though, it certainly is in Afghanistan.
Yes, it has been reported that the top 22 officials of the new Taliban government are known associates of al-Qaeda, including 5 terrorists who were once imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay and 13 more who were sanctioned by the UN, the United Nations, as terrorists post 9/11. And I'm very alarmed, Secretary Austin, that your Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, claims there is a minimal threat. He called the terror threat from Afghanistan insignificant on a call with senators less than a month ago. He's wrong. I think all of you would admit he's wrong. The FBI director even said that he was wrong last week. He's in denial or he's lying. I would hope that his testimony and comments are not indicative of your own thoughts. And if they are different, I just truly hope they are. Let's just leave it at that. So if the Department of Defense can't get their lead policy official off the couch, which is where he told me he was during closed testimony last week, that he was sitting on the couch. He didn't really care what General Miller's opinion was. If that's the type of thought process that we put into decisions that are made at the Department of Defense with this lead policy official, maybe he needs to go back to the couch. I do think that there is still a threat in Afghanistan. I think we all need to acknowledge that, recognize it. Al-Qaeda is not gone. I hope we all make that very clear to the president. And we will have to have additional discussions about over the horizon as things develop in the upcoming months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Now let me recognize Senator Gillibrand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In continuing in my line of question from the first round, Secretary Austin and General Milley, are you aware of any internal audits that are being conducted within the Department of Defense on the execution of the war over the last 20 years?
I am not, other than the AAR activity that we will conduct within the department.
What's that?
After action review.
And what will make up that review?
We'll focus on the things that have occurred as a part of this latest operation. But I think your initial question was, is there a review over the last 20 years? And the answer to that is no. So.
And do you think a review of broad scope would be useful to the DoD and useful to policymakers in the future, particularly this committee?
I do, Senator, and I also think, as I mentioned earlier, that should have an interagency flavor as well.
And do you have any recommendations for an external independent review of the war in Afghanistan? For example, what do you think Congress's role should be, and how would such an audit be conducted? What U.S. agencies, countries, and organizations should be included in the review of America's longest war?
Yeah, I don't have any recommendations at this point. I can certainly take that for the record, Senator.
I would be grateful for that. Secretary Austin and General Milley, this is something that hits a little closer to home. A number of our diplomats, intelligence officers, and service members who assisted with evacuation, including the 10th Mountain Division from Fort Drum, New York, were subjected to acute trauma and chronic stress, a problem we are not unfamiliar with after the last 20 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Families at Fort Drum have told my office it felt like a full deployment compressed into the time of a few weeks. Further, so many of our service members have lost their lives to suicide, which has been devastating. What is DoD doing to ensure that our combat veterans and their families are getting adequate mental health assessment and the resources they need?
Well, thanks, Senator. I'll make a comment, and I'll let General Milley comment as well. I think you asked him as well. But you heard me say before that, my belief is that mental health is health, period. And there should be no stigma associated with seeking help if you're dealing with issues. And I've encouraged the entire force, all of our leadership, to make sure that, number one, we have adequate resources available for our troops and our families, and number two, that they destigmatize the issue of assisting help with mental health issues.
Senator, as you know, I commanded the 10th Mountain Division as well as Secretary Austin at one point. And that division is one of the most deployed divisions, along with the 101st Airborne Division out of Senator Blackburn's state. And there's significant mental health capability there to help the soldiers that were on this non-combatant evacuation. And they'll get immediate assessments upon redeployment. It's the normal procedure. And then those that need counseling, it's there. The key that we have to do is emphasize a culture of non-stigmatizing any sort of mental health issues that a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine have, and so that they feel free, they can seek out the counseling we have available.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the line of questioning that Senator Ernst started. Can you describe for us the al-Qaeda threat today, where it's located, where you believe it will be going, what the strength is compared to the strength over the last 20 years? And please answer the same question for ISIS, ISIS-K, and other variations of ISIS across the world.
You're asking me, Senator?
Yes, General Milley first, and then Secretary Austin.
So first, I think it would be good to handle it in some detail in the classified session, but in an unclassified session, I would say that the al-Qaeda threat globally is still there. The threat in Afghanistan has an opportunity now to potentially reconstitute, although it's been ripped apart pretty steadily over 20 years. And al-Qaeda has displaced other parts of the world with their affiliates in East Africa, for example, Al-Shabaab or AQAP down in Yemen, also in the Maghreb, et cetera. So there's several affiliates worldwide, some of which are quite capable and definitely have aspirations to attack the United States. With respect to ISIS, we saw ISIS core in Iraq and Iraq and all that. That was all ripped apart, but they still exist up there, by the way. And ISIS has found a new home in parts of Afghanistan, although right now they're at war essentially with the Taliban. But ISIS has affiliates as well in other parts of the world because of their brutality. So there are other regions of the world which have high concentrations of very lethal terrorist organizations that have aspirations to conduct operations against the United States. And we have operations in intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, et cetera, in all of those parts to continue to watch that. But it has moved in various parts, and we can cover that in some detail in a classified session, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pursue both questions for both in classified setting.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley and General McKenzie, I ran out of time before I could thank you for some of the work that your staff did in August. We were working several cases. I was involved. I remember a conversation with one of your staff, General McKenzie, at about 3 o'clock in the morning while we were trying to shepherd someone out, and we did get them out successfully along with some American citizens. But unfortunately, we have a much longer list of people that we were not successful with getting out. Between SIV holders and family members, my office alone has over 900 people still on a list of people who are still in Afghanistan. And we communicate with these people through WhatsApp. We were trying to shepherd them to HKIA and then back and forth, and ultimately operations were shut down and they were stranded and left behind. So what role, and Secretary Austin, maybe I'll start with you, what role, if any, and actually before I answer that on the mental health issue, we were working with a Marine who was trying to get an interpreter out. Had been maintaining contact for years. We had all the authenticating documentation. We weren't successful in that case. That Marine committed suicide about 3 weeks ago, retired Marine. So this is having real-life consequences not only in Afghanistan but here in the United States. So Secretary Austin, what role, if any, does the DOD play in helping us draw down this list of people that we believe we have documentation that suggests they should somehow get shepherded out of Afghanistan?
Senator, first of all, my deepest condolences on the loss of our Marine. Really saddened to hear that. Thoughts and prayers to his families. DOD continues to work as a part of the cell that you may have heard me mention earlier. That's actually run or headed up by the State Department, and Ambassador John Bass is running that. And we're trying to pull in as much information from every corner that we can and refine lists and refine contact information so that we can reach out and make sure that people have the right credentials to be able to leave the country. And so we continue to work with, as a part of the state effort on this issue. So.
I think it'd be helpful to find out what our point of contact was. It was literally me reaching somebody to see if they could help me or moving it up the chain of command to where I was able to personally intervene in several cases. General Milley and General McKenzie, some people have said we're glad that we've ended this war. Is the war on terror over? General Milley?
Absolutely not.
General McKenzie?
The war on terror is not over, and the war in Afghanistan is not over either.
Has the exit from Afghanistan made the war more challenging for us or less challenging with respect to continuing to try and protect the homeland and U.S. interest abroad?
Senator, this made it more challenging.
General Milley, you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
A related note, a Wall Street Journal article published on August 31st said U.S. officials acknowledged the military has lost 90% of the intelligence collection capabilities it had using drones before the drawdown. Do you agree with that?
I didn't see the report. It said, say again what it said?
It said we have lost 90% of our intelligence collection capabilities it had using drones before the drawdown.
I'd have to go look at the actual math. I've got my J2 actually doing that right now to determine the level of ISR assets and the statistics. It is significant. I don't know if it's 90%, but it's significant.
On the SIVs and folks that are stranded in Afghanistan, is it fair to say that our human intelligence network, given the current status and the fact that many were left behind, is it fair to say that that's been stressed even more so than our drone surveillance capabilities? I mean, do we have much in the way of human intelligence on the ground in Afghanistan today?
We can explain that, I think, in good detail in a classified session, but there is still, yes.
Do we also, back to General or Secretary Austin, I think it's so important for us to show that we're going to move heaven and earth to try and get these others out of Afghanistan, because this not only has an impact in Afghanistan, it has an impact anywhere. You know, SIVs are not unique to Afghanistan. People working with us, human intelligence on the ground, keeping our forces safe is something that's standard operating procedure in a lot of dangerous areas. So I hope that we recognize that we owe it to the people of Afghanistan, but we owe it to our men and women in uniform to get this right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Now let me recognize Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, our military executed a massive operation during the month of August. As I understand it, it was larger than the Berlin airlift. For the record, can you just tell us how many Americans you evacuated?
Almost 6,000. I can get your precise number for the record, but it's about 6,000.
Let's get the right number for the record, but that's helpful. And how many people in total did the U.S. and coalition forces evacuate?
124,000. Total 44,000 went out on non-U.S. aircraft, and the rest came out on U.S. aircraft.
Okay, an extraordinary effort, but still, it's hard to get everyone out.
Largest airlift in history.
Right. Hard to get everyone out. One problem, of course, is that there were so many Afghan SIV applicants in Kabul waiting to be evacuated because the Trump administration had essentially shut the program down. Withdrawal was a massive operation conducted in a chaotic, unpredictable environment, and some people have criticized you for leaving on August 31st, but I just want to explore that for a minute. General Milley, once the Afghan government collapsed in August, would you say that staying past the date of their collapse would have exposed the force on the ground to substantial additional risk?
Yes, and that is exactly what we assessed, that if we stayed past the 31st, the risk to force, U.S. military casualties, the risk to the mission, the ability to continue to execute a NEO, and most importantly, the risk to the American citizens that are still there was going to go to, we assessed, very high levels, and we thought that that was a level of risk that was unacceptable.
Okay, and just so I'm sure, and everybody's got this on the record, so if we'd stayed another week or 2 or 3, then it's likely there would have been another attack that killed American service members? Is that what you're saying?
I would say that that is a near certainty.
All right. For years, we poured money into the Afghan government, and for years, we trained their army, we outfitted them with all the best American equipment, we provided them with overwhelming air power. Even so, both the Afghan government and the army collapsed almost instantaneously. So, General Milley, let me ask you, given how quickly the Afghan government and the Afghan army collapsed, do you think that either or both would have been able to stand on their own with just another few months or another few years of American assistance and training?
I think at this point that's unknowable, but my estimate at the time was if you kept advisors there, kept money flowing, et cetera, that we probably could have sustained them for a lengthy or indefinite period of time. Whether or not you would have had a different result at the end of the day, that's a different question.
You know, when I hear you say that, it reminds me of all the years that I've sat now on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and how many times the generals have come in front of us, and when you point out every way in which the Afghan government was failing and the Afghan army was failing, the generals respond with, but we're turning the corner now.
I didn't say we're turning the corner, Senator. I said we could sustain them.
And that we would be able to keep them, and somehow when we got ready to withdraw, they would be so well sustained that they would not have collapsed instantaneously the way they did after 20 years of sustenance and training?
Oh, I think the end state probably would have been the same no matter when you did it.
Well, you know,
Right.
I believe that leaving a force behind would have necessitated that force staying indefinitely.
That's right.
And many of those service members would have been exposed to unnecessary risk and harm.
That's exactly right.
We agree. And I also just want to say, this week we will have our 5th hearing on Afghanistan in the 8 months since President Biden took office. During the Trump years, as the Afghan government and the Afghan army racked up one failure after another, the Republicans seem far less interested in this topic, holding one public hearing a year. The Republicans' sudden interest in Afghanistan is plain old politics. It is not the kind of oversight that we should have been exercising in years past. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Senator Sullivan,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Chairman. And just to my colleague's statement, it's a little bit rich coming from one of my colleagues on this committee who wants to gut the military and its readiness. So, but that's a whole nother issue. I want to get back to my line of questioning from this morning, and I will tell you again, gentlemen, I've never seen so much anger, at least from my constituents, who've witnessed a fiasco, a humiliation, a president who is consistently telling falsehoods to the American people, and the issue of there's no accountability. And you gentlemen have spent decades serving your country honorably in combat. I have the utmost respect for your service, your fidelity to America. And importantly, you've dedicated your lives to an institution that has a culture of strict accountability and responsibility up and down the ranks. I mentioned a few examples this morning, the collisions of the USS McCain and Fitzgerald. Everybody up and down the ranks, including the 3-star admiral, was relieved. The recent, very tragic Marine AAV accident, everybody up and down the ranks, including the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, was relieved. If you're a Marine or Army 2nd Lieutenant training your platoon on patrol and one of your soldiers loses his NVGs or his rifle, that lieutenant is going to get relieved. But on this issue, one of the biggest national security fiascos in a generation, no one is accountable. And the American people are livid because they saw it, they see it, they know. It's a debacle. General Milley, this morning you called the Afghan retrograde a logistical success, but, quote, a strategic failure. I appreciate your honest assessment. I believe the President of the United States is solely responsible for this. Mr. Secretary, do you know if anyone, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, or Undersecretary for Policy of DOD has offered their resignation to take responsibility for this fiasco?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not, but I don't believe they have.
Okay, thank you. Given the military culture of accountability that all of you gentlemen come from, and again, I respect that more than almost anybody, have any of you offered your resignation to the President at any time since his decision to withdraw? And General Milley, I understand your earlier answer to this question, that senior military advisors and officers can't resign every time they disagree with the President. I actually agree with that. But after the President's decision, when the American people see such a strategic failure, as you called it, that's undermining our national security, they expect accountability, and there has been none. So have any of you accepted that accountability or responsibility?
I'm accountable for my actions. And
no, I'm just talking about a resignation.
I have not submitted my letter of resignation.
Mr. Secretary?
No.
General?
I have not submitted a letter of resignation.
Mr. Secretary, I want to know, what will it take for someone, anyone in the Biden administration to take responsibility or accountability for this national security fiasco? Anyone?
Senator, from a DOD perspective, again, you heard me say that we'll continue to review our actions, and we won't hesitate to be critical of ourselves. And if there's someone that should be held accountable for an action, then we'll certainly do that.
I want to switch topics here very quickly. General Milley, do you think if the Chinese Communist Party decided to invade Taiwan, would their military leadership call and give you a heads up?
I think there'd be a period of increased tension, indicators and warnings, and I think there'd be an exchange of various communications at all levels. Department
you really
of State.
think the Chinese,
and I think
you really think the Chinese Communist Party head of the PLA would call and say, "Hey, General, FYI, we're going to get ready to invade Taiwan. I just thought I'd give you a heads up." You honestly think that?
I know I'd call him and ask him.
No,
I
I'm
would
asking
call him
the
and
other
ask him
question.
outright.
Do you think he'd give you a heads up
I think
on the invasion of Taiwan?
I think an invasion of Taiwan would be a fairly obvious thing to pick up on. And
No,
there'd
I
be a lot of
didn't. But that's not what I
communication
asked.
going back and
Let me ask a related question.
Sure.
I think the answer to that is no. I think if the head of the PLA called you and said, "Hey, we're getting ready to invade Taiwan," and Xi Jinping found out about it, he'd be shot. But let me ask a related question. You said you were, quote, certain that President Trump did not intend on attacking China. That's what you just said.
That's correct.
Yet you're quoted in the Woodward book as telling the top Chinese Communist military commander, quote, "If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time." Is that true, General Milley?
Well, let me tell you what I actually said.
Well, that's not true. I hope that's
Let me
not
tell you what I actually said, Senator. What I said, if there's going to be a war, if there's going to be an attack, there's going to be a lot of calls and tension ahead of time.
But what
you're going to
said,
get called. You're going to get called.
Your testimony was that you were
Senator,
certain President Trump would not attack. That's your testimony this morning.
That is true. That is
okay, then why
absolutely
would
true.
you?
And I was communicating to my Chinese counterpart on instructions, by the way, to de-escalate the situation. And I told him that we are not going to attack. President Trump has no intent to attack. And I told him that repeatedly. And I told him if there was going to be an attack, there'll be plenty of communications going back and forth. Your intel system's going to pick it up. I said, I'll probably call you. Everybody will be calling you. We're not going to attack you. Just settle down. It's not going to happen. And I did it twice, in October and January.
I think if you're giving a heads up to the Chinese Communist Party.
I didn't give them a heads up we're going to attack because we weren't going to attack.
If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you
which was
ahead
being
of time.
faithful to the President of the United States' intent.
Time
I was
expired.
being faithful to his intent, Senator.
Thank you very much. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, in your confirmation hearing, you spoke of focusing on our shared interest with Pakistan. A readout from your August call with Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff contained some similar language that you expressed. My question to you, could you please elaborate for this committee on what you view as our shared interest with Pakistan today? And I'm particularly interested in how this relates with the Pakistani government's relationship with the Taliban, now that the Taliban are in power in Afghanistan.
Well, thanks, Senator. I think that one key shared interest is the prevention of a humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan or in the region. And so I think we'll continue to share that interest. I do think there is some intersection in terms of certain types of terrorist activity that I think we can both remain focused on. Again, an in-depth conversation about Pakistan probably would be better suited in a closed hearing there. So.
Very well. I understand that there were certain airplanes, helicopters, and ground vehicles that were disabled as forces left and as the Afghan forces were overrun. And right now, I don't want to talk about the operability of a Humvee or a MRAP or the pictures we saw of Taliban sitting on grounded C-130s. What concerns me more is the potential for our strategic adversaries to have some time and space to examine the technology inside those vehicles to find vulnerabilities. And even if a system has been disabled, in some ways destroyed, reverse engineering can still be used on those systems and can provide information to sophisticated adversaries that may get a hold of this. And as all of you know, we harden our supply chains to protect military technology. It's a matter of national security. So my question for you, Secretary Austin, is the department now conducting an extensive counterintelligence assessment of equipment to get a sense of what might be reverse engineered, and how do we protect against any use of that information against our forces?
We will continue to assess what's exploitable, Senator. I would flag for you that all of this equipment is not high-end equipment. Again, the equipment that we had for our use was retrograded as General Miller drew down the retrograded equipment and drew down our forces. I would also like to flag for you, sir, that while the number $84 billion has been bounced about quite a bit, that's the number that we invested in Afghan security forces over a 20-year period of time. Less than 20% of that was dedicated towards Afghan equipment. Most of that money was focused on sustainment and salaries and those types of things. So.
General McKenzie, if you could go back in time and change one thing about the strategy in the last 6 months of operations in Afghanistan, which could have alleviated some of the chaos that we saw at the end, what would it be?
In the last 6 months, Senator would, of course, infer that the decisions made were going to zero. I think I go back to, could we have gotten more people out earlier in the process? By that I mean U.S. citizens, and I know the embassy put out at least a dozen notices to U.S. citizens to leave. I know that the ambassador was very aggressive on that. I would have liked to maybe have seen done more there, more done in that regard. Additionally, perhaps to try to get more of the SIV population out. But, Senator, I think we need to recognize that if you're asking the Afghans to fight and at the same time you're bringing out the best and the brightest, that's clearly a conflicting message that you're sending them. So I don't say that lightly or recognize there wouldn't be inherent risk in taking that course of action.
So there would have been a risk doing those things.
There would have, in my judgment, yes. But that's a way that we could have, could have been more forceful with our own citizens, although, there are very strict limitations on what you can say or do to an American citizen abroad for good reason. So I think, you got to trust the good judgment of the people, of the American citizens that are in Afghanistan.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, why did the committee not get the testimony for today until 10:35 last night? Were you guys not prepared?
We were prepared, and again, I don't know the specifics of what last-minute adjustments were being made at what level, but we were prepared.
Well, it must not have been a level below you then, or you'd be aware of it, right? So it would have to be a level above you. In other words, did the White House withhold your testimony? General Milley, did you have your testimony done before 10:35 last night?
We did, but the White House wasn't withholding my testimony, no.
Who was?
Nobody. I mean, you have to submit, when you submit written documents, as you well know, you have to submit them to OMB.
Right.
They reviewed them in the afternoon. We got them back, I don't know, 1900, something like that. And then we made the changes and submitted them. And yes, we were late.
But it wasn't you.
No.
It was
wasn't
OMB.
any intent to block.
Yeah. It was somebody's strategy, is my guess. Just might not have been yours, but it clearly was somebody's. General McKenzie, about a half hour ago, you said, we know for certain ISIS intends to attack us at home, or something to that effect, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 20 years ago on September 11th, when the terrorist hijackers took over 4 aircraft and attacked the homeland, all of them came here on a visa, correct? Now, in the last 20 years, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, they haven't acquired ICBMs or a Navy or an Air Force, as far as we know. So if they are going to carry out that intent, they're going to have to get here themselves. And that means either through a visa program or as refugees across the southern border. My question to all of you is, isn't national security tied directly to good immigration security? And do you feel like we're adequately prepared to protect the homeland from visa holders and refugees?
Senator, in the case of ISIS, I think we've done a remarkable job over the last 2 decades about hardening the entry process and making it very difficult for them to get their agents into the United States. And that's a matter of record, just based on performance. The same thing with AQ. The larger discussion about immigration, I defer to the Secretary and the Department.
Well, I would submit to you that as good as the work's been done in the last 20 years, the last 6 or 7 months, it's been pretty well degraded, I would say. Others, immigration policy pretty important to national security?
It absolutely is, Senator. And again, I wouldn't want to, again, that's the domain of Secretary Mayorkas. And I know that he and the interagency continue to work that very hard.
All right. According to CENTCOM press release, General, post-strike, this is a quote now, post-strike reflections indicate that Kabir Adi was directly connected to the ISIS-K leaders that coordinated the August 26th attack at the airport. The way I read that, the actual ISIS-K leaders who coordinated the attack are still out there. Is that true?
I'd prefer to talk about it in the private
I thought you might. I look forward to that, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Kramer. Now let me recognize Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to say thank you. I just received a letter this morning in response to a letter I'd written to you and Secretary Blinken asking about the process of certifying that somebody did work for the DOD as a contractor. I do want to say that a response is a good one. I think you've made, with regards to Project Rabbit, which I'll give you a couple minutes to talk about, but it seems that you've reviewed over 7,800 employment records and matched over 3,400 of those pre-com applicants. Would you like to talk about Operation Rabbit just a little bit?
Well, only to say that, I mentioned earlier, Senator, that this, when this question came up, that this is important to us. We think we have to do everything we can to shorten the amount of time that it takes for somebody who's worked with us before to be able to verify that they have worked with us. We're going to continue to work on this, and again, one of my major directorates is focused on this, and we'll work with the committee on this if you have further requirements. But thanks for your support in this regard.
Thank you. And I know each one of us probably does have folks who've contacted our office seeking help in verifying their employment as a contractor, not just under DOD, but also with state. I'd like to change shift gears a little bit and talk about Mark Frerichs. Although military operations have ended, an Illinoisan and a veteran of the U.S. Navy, Mr. Mark Frerichs is still being held hostage in Afghanistan. He was abducted in Kabul on January 31st of last year, and while he's been held captive too long, recent reporting in Newsweek indicates Taliban willingness to engage on his release. Anas Haqqani, a senior Taliban official, confirmed that U.S. and Taliban negotiators have discussed my constituent and said about the prospect of a deal to secure Mr. Frerich's freedom, quote, "There are attempts between the Political Bureau and the United States envoy, which we hope will be successful in this regard. We must continue to press for Mr. Frerich's swift and safe return. This must be a top priority for our government." And in August, a Pentagon spokesperson stated the DoD is laser focused on returning him home safely to his family and where he belongs. And Secretary Austin, I know from our numerous conversations, including just yesterday about my constituents, that you have been personally involved in attempting to secure his return, both in your engagements with your counterparts in the region and in your role as a member of the Principals Committee of the National Security Council. Can you please update me on your discussions regarding Mr. Frerichs with your foreign counterparts, as well as your interagency partners in our government? And I know his family is probably watching this testimony today.
This is, as you have indicated, Senator, I want him back. And, we're going to do everything, continue to do everything we can to get him back. As you and I have talked in other sessions, I've engaged the chief of the Pakistani Army on multiple occasions to solicit his help. I've engaged other senior leadership, Qataris, for example, to use their influence to see if they can help us there. We'll remain focused on this. This is. I'm hopeful that we can see some daylight and some movement here in the future. I don't have anything to offer you in terms of specific readouts from the interagency process, and I defer to Mr. Sullivan to provide commentary there. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Secretary. And I appreciate your commitment to getting Mr. Frerichs home. I am, however, frustrated by how little information there has been made available to congressional staff and others when it comes to everyone who's trying to get allies out of Afghanistan. General Milley, I understand from public reporting that you've been working with some veterans groups and some other NGOs who have been voluntarily offering their help in the continued effort to evacuate Americans and at-risk Afghans from Afghanistan. Can you share any details with us and the public today about that effort?
Yeah, so what we did, Senator, is we did a little bit of outreach to some of the groups that are probably well-known to folks in this room. Had them in for some sessions in the Defense Department to get coordinated so we could have a common operating picture of what SIVs, what P1, P2s, and what American citizens, most importantly, are still there, try to get the information in a singular database, et cetera, from the various groups. In addition to that, get them linked into Ambassador Bass, because he is the single focal point with the Department of State, which we've done that now. And we have a joint staff general officer who's involved in that working group with them, and he's our liaison and brings them all together in order to get all the information, in order to develop courses of action to help bring out additional American citizens and others.
Thank you. Will you commit to communicating with me and all of Congress about this partnership, and so we can help facilitate the connections with these people who still remain at risk and are contacting us through our various offices?
I will. It is being run by the Department of State, but I will work with the Department of State to make sure that they get it over to you. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Let me recognize Senator Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Milley, why would you, as the sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talk to a reporter that's writing a book about a prior administration? Why would that be part of your job description?
Well, as Senator Blackburn said earlier, I deal with the media routinely, 2, 3, 4 times a week. I'm talking to the media. And the media, whether it's books, TV news, reporters, we have a lot of media here. I think it's very, very important to make sure that senior officials talk to the media in all of its various forms in order to explain what we're doing.
That's but you're talking about what happened in the past.
Sure,
I
past.
mean, why would you do that? I mean, what's the upside to the American public of you talking to, you have all this sensitive information,
sure.
You have a full-time job, and then you go out and talk about the prior administration. I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. If the media wants to ask you about what we're doing right now, something like that, I get it. But the prior administration, why would you do that?
I think it's important to make sure that the American people are transparent with what our government does, that's all. Nothing more complicated than that.
So it's been reported you discussed sensitive information, including private conversations you had with the prior president with these reporters. How is that consistent with your testimony today that you won't talk about any conversations you've had with the president? You only talk about what your position is. But it's been reported that by these reporters that you've told them exactly the conversations you had with the prior president. Does that seem inconsistent?
I'm not so sure about what they're reporting, about what I said, and private conversations, et cetera. I don't share private conversations with the president. With this president, former president, any president. Period.
So what these reporters are saying is completely untrue?
I'm not going to say whether they're I don't even know what they're written. I haven't read their books. But I can tell you that I don't share my personal conversations with the president. Period.
So Senator Sullivan was asking about this conversation about whether you would give prior notice to the military communist China that America's going to attack. So is it your testimony you will not ever give a heads up to the communist Chinese military if the president of the United States, it doesn't matter who the president is, that you're reporting to is ready to attack?
Of course I wouldn't. I
mean, you don't feel like you did that, you said that at all?
No, the context we were talking about, Senator, there was a significant degree of intelligence, and I think I put the unclassified versions in that timeline. And it's not insignificant. It's not like one report or two. It's an entire body of intelligence that led us to believe that the Chinese were misinterpreting our actions and misinterpreting what was happening inside our own country politically, and they were assessing a situation that was leading to escalation, possible incident, and it would have been quite dangerous. So Secretary Esper and I met, and we met with other members of the team, and we developed an engagement plan to ensure that we engaged at various levels. Secretary Esper had his DASD do it, and he asked me to do it, so I did that. And I made a call, and the theme was to de-escalate, to lower tensions. And I believe that is a faithful and loyal execution of my constitutional responsibilities. And I believe that was faithfully executing the intent of the President of the United States at the time, because I knew with certainty that President Trump was not going to attack the Chinese just out of the blue. It wasn't going to happen. And if things did happen, there would be periods of tension, calls going back and forth. So
I have one more question.
Sorry.
It's been reported that you had concerns about the prior president's fitness for office. Do you have a criteria for presidents, and have you reviewed the existing President Biden for his fitness for office, or do you think that way? Do you think you have the ability to have a right to make those decisions, and have you been doing that?
I'm not qualified to evaluate the mental fitness or the health of a former president, present president, or anybody else, or anybody in this room. That's not my job. That's not what I do, and that's not what I did. There was a lot of speculation going on, but I don't evaluate people's health and fitness. That's not my job.
Okay. How did you feel when President Biden attacked the willingness of the Afghan military to fight? How did that make you feel?
How did I feel?
Yeah, when he went and attacked, he said he didn't think the Afghan military had the willingness to fight. How does that make you, as a military officer, how does that make you feel? I mean, something that you've put your
I think
your
the
life
Afghan
on the line.
military sacrifice, I mean, there's 60 or 70,000 Afghans that were killed in action over the last 20 years defending their country. And I thought, and I personally am witness to units that fought well and fought bravely and gave their life for their country. But I would also say at the same time that over the summer, in those 11 days, the vast majority of the Afghan units put their weapons down, and they surrendered without a fight. Kabul was taken with a couple hundred guys on motorcycles, and there wasn't a shot fired. So my question to myself is, how did we miss that? What happened? How did that happen? And that's one of the things we've got to figure out. How is it that an army of that size, that they were trained, they were manned, they were equipped, et cetera, how is it that the factors of will and leadership and morale just collapsed like that? And we have to answer that to ourselves. But the Afghan army fought for their country for 20 years and lost a lot of people.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Scott, excuse me. Senator Rosen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us throughout this long day. You know, I just want to speak about how, as Americans, we are really frustrated, all of us, about the way we withdrew from Afghanistan, but we nonetheless understand the difficult position that you and our men and women in uniform on the ground were, the position you were in last month. So what the American people fail to understand, however, and what I, too, have difficulty accepting, is the idea that the circumstances we found ourselves in were inevitable. So I'd like to ask about a few areas where perhaps we might have taken a different approach that could have given us more time to accomplish the mission. So General McKenzie, why was it always the responsibility of the U.S. and coalition forces or contractors to maintain Afghan aircraft and equipment? And why were the Afghan forces either not trained or not given this responsibility over the last 20 years?
So I think you begin with the basic technological literacy of the country, which began when we first had dealings with them in 2001. You know, you're talking to people who are coming out of rule by the Taliban, imposition of Sharia law, a Stone Age approach to these things. You cannot impose technological literacy quickly. So that's why it took a long time, and we were still not finished with the Afghan Air Force. And, you know, there's a lot of contract maintenance done for a lot of air forces around the world. The Afghan Air Force is not unique in that regard, although in this case it was particularly telling because they were so dependent on it.
And so understanding that, would it have been helpful to keep Bagram Air Base open in order to help with any of this going on, any of the evacuation, anybody else coming through the country, another place for our citizens, people from other countries, or special SIV holders, any of those folks?
Ma'am, I was intimately involved in all the decisions on Bagram, and in no way would Bagram have been able to contribute to either the effective use of the Afghan Air Force, its continued maintenance, or bringing people out. And very briefly, I can tell you that once we went below 2,500 people in Afghanistan, we lost the ability to hold Bagram Air Base. And it was inevitable that we were going to have to come out of Bagram because we ended up in late June, early July with 650 Marines and soldiers in the country. It was not feasible to hold Bagram under those circumstances. So we were driven by the plan, which we had all had an opportunity to work, that we were going to come out of Bagram. There was no way we were going to be able to keep Bagram and go to effective zero in Afghanistan. Just not possible.
Well, thinking of what we may have gained or may have lost as we leave, we think about countering adversaries. So again, General McKenzie, what is your assessment of the foreign influence in Afghanistan in the wake of our withdrawal? And what are the measures that we can take now to prevent our adversaries from filling the vacuum created by our departure?
Senator, last week I was in Kazakhstan, in the capital of Kazakhstan, Nur-Sultan, where I hosted what we call the Casa-Chad Conference. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Pakistan. We all met and we talked about that region after the fall of Afghanistan. And generally, what they want is they want assurance. They want to continue to have ties with the United States because they want alternatives to Russia and they want alternatives to China. Unfortunately, because of their geographic location, they are going to always have to deal with Russia and China. But I think our partners in the region want a message that the United States is not going to turn our back on them, even though we left Afghanistan. And we had a very productive two-day conference based on those themes.
Well, I couldn't agree more because I think it makes us more vulnerable if we allow anyone else to fill that vacuum. I'd like to, in the just minute I have left, just touch briefly on the fate of Afghan women. What we've seen regarding the status of women in territories where the Taliban had retained control prior to overthrowing the Afghan government, we know how horrible the conditions are for women. And so what do you see moving forward for the fate of Afghan women? What can we do? What do you see as the future for women's
Senator,
rights in Afghanistan?
During our long engagement in Afghanistan, I think we make great strides in educational and other opportunities for women in Afghanistan. I think those are all now gravely at risk with the return of the Taliban. So the levers that we have are economic and diplomatic, which are not part of the Department of Defense. And I think that's how we have to work the problem. And I do think there is opportunity It will not be a long-lived opportunity, a matter of months perhaps, where we can force the Taliban down a certain path based on their desire to have international financing, international recognition, the release of sanctions, and other things that are very important to them. So I think we've got to be very hard-nosed as we negotiate with them going forward to ensure these gains are not lost.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the hearing today, and I'll be submitting more questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I want to come back to you. We discussed that you have had conversations with Woodward, Costa, Leonig, Rucker, and Bender on their books, correct?
Not Coster.
You did not on Costa. Well, he took to social media.
Woodward, yes, and others.
We'll leave that as a point of discussion. Okay, in any of these conversations, did you discuss private meetings with the president or White House officials?
White House officials, perhaps. President, I don't think so.
So you never discussed any of your conversations with President Trump?
With President Trump.
With any of these authors?
Not a private conversation.
Okay. Did you portray the commander-in-chief in a negative light or make comments that were critical of the commander-in-chief to any of these authors with which you had conversations?
Not my comments or my observations, no.
You did
others that were relayed to me from others,
okay.
perhaps.
Well, I'm looking forward to your book report on
Great.
this. Would you see these conversations as an abuse of executive privilege?
I would not, no.
You would not, okay. Let me ask you this. What is your standard for determining when to leak private conversations with the president?
I don't leak private conversations with the president.
You did not. So you had these conversations with the authors, but you don't see that as leaking information to which they were not entitled to know. See, this is the problem that we have. See, as a member of this committee and as someone who represents a lot of our men and women in uniform that are there, as we've referenced today, I've really got an issue with the fact that you will talk to authors, but then you all come in here and you say, well, we can't tell you what we told the president, and then I have to drag it out of you that the written documents, which under Article 2, you're supposed to give those to us. You can't go hide behind somebody's skirts on this, and you don't want to give those to us. So you've repeatedly told this committee that you will not reveal your private conversations with President Biden, but then you've leaked this information from your meetings with President Trump. So it is important to us that you truthfully respond to us on this.
Absolutely.
And I think what you did with making time to talk to these authors, burnishing your image, kind of, building that bluster, but then not putting the focus on Afghanistan and what was happening there. General Milley, that is really disappointing to me. I know it's disappointing to people that have served with you or under your command, and it does not serve our nation well. You talked a little bit earlier about the damage, and you said damage was the right word to use when assessing what has happened in Afghanistan when you look at America's credibility. So how do you look the men and women in the eye that have served under your command? How do you look young men in the eye that are coming to our military academy days and who want to serve and say, you can depend on me, I've got your back? Because you know what? I think a lot of these families right now, they don't feel like you have your back. The special ops guys I met with Friday in my office in Nashville that are taking their time, their money, and risking their lives to do a job that the three of you could not do. Maybe we're going to remember you three as the three that broke the military. I don't know. But this is causing just a lot of anger from people who have trusted the military. They have felt like the military was one of the most trustworthy institutions. But in order to get a name in a book, in order to not be drawn into a political fight, what you have managed to do is to politicize the U.S. military, to downgrade our reputation with our allies. Nobody has resigned. Nobody has submitted their resignation. And we've got thousands of people watching this hearing today that are looking at you all and saying, I can't believe they're sitting there and not answering the questions and are trying to punt. I yield back.
Thank you. Now let me recognize Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to ask some questions. At the time, because we were short on time, I didn't have the opportunity to thank all three of you, General Milley, Secretary Austin, General McKenzie, for your service to our country, serving in combat overseas, multiple deployments. Your family has served as well, all of your families, and I want to thank you personally for that. It is a big commitment. I understand it. Secretary Austin, since U.S. troops departed Kabul on August 31st, the number of evacuation flights has been very small. The State Department briefed on Friday that only 4 charter flights have departed with U.S. support, and the ability to leave by a land route is even less right now. The testimony today has indicated that the mission of facilitating evacuation for Americans and vulnerable Afghans is ongoing. Can you explain what role the military has in ongoing evacuation efforts being led by the State Department?
That can be helpful in contacting people who have a desire to get out and have the right credentials. And if they don't have the right credentials, are there things that we can do to help them obtain those credentials if they've helped us work with us in the past, or if they're an American citizen with expired credentials?
And do you anticipate there will be transport from third countries? Many of our Afghan allies have left and now find themselves in a third country. Should we expect that there'll be flights out of those places as well?
I think those individuals, as they work with our embassy personnel in those various countries, to help us help them again if they qualify as one of the people who helped us in the past. Certainly, either taking a routine commercial flight or taking a chartered flight that we can help sponsor. I do anticipate there'll be some sort of activity in the future. But again, I don't want to speak for the State Department. I will tell you, Senator, that from a DoD perspective, we're going to do everything we can to help enable this effort.
Throughout this evacuation effort, my office worked closely with groups of former Afghan pilots and women who served, in addition to American citizens and veterans working to assist them in leaving the country. These are men and women who trained with us, who fought with us, and who are at heightened risk because of it. So I'm concerned that they were not a priority in our evacuation efforts, and that guidance on immigration options for them has been inadequate. Due to the challenges and uncertainties of accessing evacuation flights, many Afghan evacuees sought alternative means of escape, flying to these third-party countries, as I mentioned. How is the Defense Department working with state right now to ensure that these individuals don't fall through the cracks with regards to resettlement.
Again, I'd have to defer to state in terms of outlining what the resettlement processes are. But in terms of direct activity on the Department of Defense, we don't have much. We're not a big part of that effort, the resettlement effort in third countries. Excuse me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And again, I want to thank all three of you for being here today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Senator Kelly. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I've just got one more question for you about these many book interviews that you did. I Alone Can Fix It's one book, Perils, another book. Frankly, we did win this election. The inside story of how Trump lost is the third book. Seems like that's a significant outlay of time.
I don't think so. I think that
they were short interviews?
Relatively short. I don't think it took an excessive amount of time.
What was the time frame on these interviews for these three different books? These are, by the way, these are for folks who don't know at home. You said you didn't read the books. I don't think most people probably do. These are DC Insider tell-all type books. But what was the time frame, did you say, that you were doing these interviews?
I would say it took a couple of hours, maybe.
But when? What's the time frame? When were you sitting for them? Dates?
I can get you the dates. I don't know.
This
I don't
year?
know off the top of my head, but I'll get you the dates.
2021?
Oh, yeah.
So it was this calendar year?
I think so, yeah, sure.
Well, I just am wondering, it's clearly this was a priority for you. You did these on the record, by the way? All these interviews are on the record with these reporters? They quote you?
I do interviews on the record, off the record, and I do background interviews. And I do all of that with print media, television media, books, documentaries, all kinds of things.
I thought, why would you do background and off the record interviews? Background means you can't quote you. Background and off the record interviews if the goal is transparency.
The transparency goes to the fact to make sure that we are explaining ourselves and make sure that these authors have correct information.
Not attributable
let's take
to you.
Woodward, for example, probably 200 people interviewed, and they approach my guys to say, are these facts true? This is what we heard. So we clarify and mitigate any incorrect information.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're doing these interviews, you're doing them in 2021. It just makes me wonder, all of these different books, were you maybe a little distracted? Maybe a little distracted about what was going on in Afghanistan? Here's why I'm asking. General Miller testified to this committee that he warned about the rapid erosion of the military situation in Afghanistan as early as March of 2021. He further testified that he informed you about his view on this. He also testified that he said that the collapse of the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government could come very fast in 2021.
Hard and fast.
And he said that he informed you this. He also said that he informed Secretary Austin of this.
He did.
Now, at the same time, however, in June, you were saying, and I quote you now, an outright takeover by the Taliban is unlikely. That's at an Armed Services Committee meeting in the House, June 23rd. In July, you said the Afghan security forces have the capacity to sufficiently fight and defend their country. You also said that they were well equipped. On June 17th, you told the Senate Appropriations Committee the Afghan government had a 325 to 350,000 person security force, which we now know is a drastic overestimate. A few days later, you lowered that to 300,000. Which we still know is a drastic overestimate. Your generals on the ground, your commander on the ground is saying one thing. The Taliban has a massive offensive underway from May 1st on, but yet you told us very different things in public. How do you reconcile those things? What am I missing?
Well, first of all, Scott Miller did say hard and fast, and he also meant that, at least to me and to others, that he meant that to be in the fall, October, November, maybe even December timeframe.
I heard you say that earlier. Yeah. I'm curious about that. I have to tell you, that wasn't his testimony to this committee.
Well, what he said in the committee was hard and fast. He didn't put a date on it. Is the readouts to me? I don't know. Did he put a date on it?
No, he didn't put a date on
but
it.
He did
you put a date on it. That's what intrigues me.
But he did put a date on it with me and to us. And when pressed, it was after we leave. That was point one, which was 31 August, and probably into the October timeframe, maybe Thanksgiving. And that is about more or less where many of the intel assessments were
He said he was a dissenter on the intel
He did.
assessment.
That's right.
And he didn't put any of those qualifiers on his testimony to us. So are you saying he shifted his testimony, General Miller, that he wasn't?
No, I'm saying what he told me was it was likely to be in the October timeframe. The intel assessments are centering around November, Thanksgiving at the latest, Christmas. Some intel assessments went into the next year. Here's my point, Senator, is the intel assessments had two basic things, in my view, was the scale and scope plus the speed. All the intel assessments, all of us, got that wrong. There's no question about it. That was a swing and a miss on the intel assessment of 11 days in August. There's nobody that called that.
Well, can I just, General, my time is about, I appreciate that you've made these points. I don't mean to cut you off. It's just that my time is about to expire. I just want to say this. It seems to me that you put a high priority on making sure that you were favorably portrayed by the D.C. press corps. You spent a lot of time doing that. Fair enough if that's your priority. But at the same time, we had a rapidly deteriorating, frankly, disastrous situation in Afghanistan, which resulted in the death of 13 soldiers, including one from my home state, hundreds of civilians and hundreds of Americans left behind. And in my view, that mission can't be called a success in any way, shape, or form, logistical or otherwise. General, I think you should resign. Secretary Austin, I think you should resign. I think this mission was a catastrophe. I think there's no other way to say it, and there has to be accountability. I respectfully submit it should begin with you.
Senator,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, you've spoken today a lot about civilian control of the military. I appreciate the statements you made about that today. On June the 10th, though, I asked for formal questions for the record about Bagram Airfield, and I pointed out that having a major air base within 500 miles of both Iranian and Chinese borders would be very strategically invaluable. I asked you about the feasibility of retaining Bagram Airfield as a U.S. base. I'm still waiting for a reply. I hope you do see today, ignoring, questions that might come up from civilian oversight sometimes backfires on you a little bit. You apologize for being late for your statement today, the hearing, but you just got to understand the pattern here. I heard Senator Blackburn say about the book, you got to see how dismissive it looks to Congress that you've had time to interview and do all these interviews, but questions aren't answered. So I'm just troubled by some of those things. And also, on August 18th, you said, quote, "There is nothing that I or anyone else saw that indicated the collapse of the Army and this government in 11 days," end quote. I find it unbelievable with your staff of 3,200 people and a budget of $419 million taxpayer dollars that we didn't see the obvious. But I do think you saw it, because July 11, 2019, you said, quote, "I think pulling out prematurely would be a strategic mistake," end quote. Mm-hmm. You said here today, and you also said that here today. You agree?
I 100% agree.
Thank you.
May I comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
On your first 2 points. On the intel piece, I stay with what I said. There's nobody called it 11 days in August. There's nobody who did that. And I brought the intel reports. We go into classified session. I'm happy to go over all of them. And on the first thing. And then the Bagram thing, I did put a very lengthy response in my written statement. I don't know if you had an opportunity to read it yet. I'd encourage you to read it. It is also something that General McKenzie put in his. And I can assure you that we looked at that whole Bagram issue very, very carefully.
Yeah. And here's what I'm struggling with. General McKenzie, 1945, we left Japan. They're one of our biggest allies today. We're still there. Germany the same way. Korea the same way. We had 2,500 troops. The war stopped in 2014, and we started what? Operation Resolute support. And we're having all these people cry, "We got to get out of here." Folks, we are going to pay for what we just did. I mean, I got young kids, y'all got kids and grandkids, and we're going to be back in there fighting. What's your thoughts about that, General McKenzie? And I know, we're not talking about the president. What do you think about the future of what we've got to do in Afghanistan?
So we have very few levers in Afghanistan right now because we've completely pulled out.
Will we be back?
I think we're always going to reserve the right to go in to go after ISIS and al-Qaeda targets as they present themselves. We've been very clear on that. And that's not going to be easy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the closed session. It will not be easy to do that. It will be possible to do that. As for larger engagements with the Taliban or whatever government follows them, I mean, that's going to be a hard road from where I sit, and I sit a very small slice of that. That's really a question, you know, for diplomats and others to talk about how our future relationship with the government as a whole will be. But I think my judgment will be they're going to regress significantly in every sphere of activity in Afghanistan over the next few years with the Taliban in charge.
We can afford to survive with our military. We got that kind of money. And it just burns me up that we're eventually going to have to go back there. We're going to have problems here. I think we should have looked at it. I know President Biden wanted to get out. He told people President Trump wanted to get out. I disagree with it. I mean, we gave up the best base in that area. And it's just amazing to me that we're going to have to go back, and hopefully we don't lose its channel. What's your thoughts about it as we ended up here, Secretary Austin?
Well, I don't think it's preordained that we're going to have to go back, Senator. I would tell you that what you've heard us say is that we recognize that transnational terrorists will migrate towards ungoverned spaces. We also are committed to not allowing al-Qaeda to regenerate and be able to export terror from Afghanistan to the United States of America. And we'll remain laser focused on that going forward. And we'll do everything within our power to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Thank you. Could I ask you one question, Officer? Are you against dishonorable discharges to the military for not taking a vaccine? You're the leader of the DOD.
I am the leader, and again, we have a non-judicial, a UCMJ that really addresses all of the issues in the military, and gives our leadership what they need to be able to enforce standards. Taking the vaccine is a requirement, and again, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Senator Tuberville. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been a long day, and we still have a closed session in SVC 217. There's a vote ongoing now, so I would suggest we reconvene into SVC 217 at 3:45. We'll give an opportunity